They found her sitting alone in the parking lot of the Riverside VA hospital at 2:47 a.m., staring at nothing. The security guard who spotted her said she hadn't moved in over an hour. Her hands were gripping the steering wheel so tight her knuckles had turned white, and when he tapped on her window she flinched like she'd been struck. But what haunted him most, what he'd tell his wife later that morning, was the look in her eyes. It wasn't fear. It wasn't grief. It was something far worse. It was recognition, like she'd been waiting 20 years for this exact moment. And now that it had arrived, she had no idea how to face it. Her name was Margaret Chen, though everyone who'd served with her called her Iron Meg. 46 years old, retired lieutenant commander, 18 years of service split between Naval Hospital Camp Pendleton and 2 brutal deployments in Afghanistan. She'd sutured wounds in sandstorms, held dying soldiers while mortars shook the ground, and once performed an emergency tracheotomy with nothing but a ballpoint pen and raw determination. The Navy had decorated her. Her patients had loved her. Her colleagues had respected her. And 3 weeks ago at her retirement ceremony they'd destroyed her. It happened during the speeches. Captain Morrison, her former commanding officer, had taken the podium. The reception hall was packed. 200 people, maybe more. Fellow nurses, doctors, administrators, even some of the soldiers she'd saved over the years had flown in to honor her. Margaret sat at the head table in her dress whites, trying not to cry as people shared stories about her dedication, her courage, her unwavering commitment to her patients. Then Morrison cleared his throat and said, "Of course, we should also address the incident that marred Lieutenant Commander Chen's otherwise distinguished career." The room went silent. Margaret's smile froze on her face. What incident? What was he talking about? The Kandahar situation, Morrison continued, his voice carrying that practiced tone of measured disappointment. I think we all remember what happened with Sergeant Davis. A tragic loss, made more tragic by the questions it raised about protocol adherence and decision-making under pressure. People were staring at her now. Whispers rippled through the crowd like wind through wheat. Margaret felt her chest tighten. Sergeant Nathan Davis, of course. Even after 7 years, his name could still crack her foundation. I'm not here to litigate the past, Morrison said, though his tone suggested otherwise. Lieutenant Commander Chen was cleared by the inquiry. But I think it's important, as we celebrate her service, that we also remember that leadership means accepting responsibility for our choices, even the difficult ones. Even the ones that haunt us. The rest of the ceremony was a blur. People still clapped when she received her retirement plaque. A few still hugged her afterward. But something fundamental had shifted. She could see it in their eyes. That seed of doubt Morrison had planted, that whisper of maybe she wasn't quite the hero we thought she was. Nobody asked her about Davis. Nobody wanted to hear her side. They just wanted to maintain their comfortable distance from whatever uncomfortable truth Morrison had implied. That was 3 weeks ago. Since then, Margaret had barely left her house. She'd stopped answering her phone, stopped checking her email. Her daughter Lisa had called 6 times, worried. Her best friend Janet had shown up at her door twice. Margaret had pretended she wasn't home both times, because how could she explain what Morrison had done? How could she tell them that Sergeant Davis's death had been the defining moment of her career? Not because she'd failed him, but because she'd made an impossible choice that saved 3 other lives. How could she make them understand that she'd carried that weight for 7 years in silence, never asking for recognition, never seeking vindication, simply bearing it because that's what leaders do? And now Morrison had weaponized her silence against her. But tonight was different. Tonight, something had changed. The letter had arrived that afternoon, postmarked from Barstow, California. No return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper, handwritten in shaky cursive, Lieutenant Commander Chen. You don't know me, but my son was Corporal James Whitmore, 3rd Battalion, 7th Marines. He was in Kandahar in 2018. He was there the night Sergeant Davis died. He's never talked about it. Not to me, not to his therapist, not to anyone. But last month he told me something. He said he's been carrying a lie for 7 years. He said what Captain Morrison told everyone at your retirement ceremony was bullshit, and he's tired of staying quiet while you take the blame for something that wasn't your fault. He wants to talk to you. He needs to talk to you. I'm including his number below. Please call him. Sandra Whitmore Margaret had read that letter 17 times. She'd picked up her phone 12 times. And she'd sat in this parking lot for the last hour and 13 minutes, trying to decide if she had the courage to dial the number. Because if Corporal Whitmore wanted to talk about that night, it meant someone finally knew the truth. And if someone knew the truth, it meant she might finally be able to breathe again. But it also meant reliving the worst night of her life. The explosion hit at 0347 hours, turning night into day for 3 terrible seconds. Margaret was in the field hospital tent, elbow deep in inventory paperwork, when the ground bucked beneath her feet and the distant boom rolled across the desert like thunder. "Incoming!" someone screamed, and then the radio crackled to life with urgent voices layered over each other. "We have casualties. Multiple casualties. Need immediate medevac." Margaret was moving before she'd fully processed the words. Years of training turned her body into pure response. She grabbed her aid bag, shouted orders to her team, and sprinted toward the motor pool where the ambulance was already revving. They reached the blast site in 4 minutes. It felt like 4 hours. The IED had hit a supply convoy returning from a checkpoint. 2 Humvees were on fire. One had flipped completely over. Bodies were scattered across the road, some moving, some terrifyingly still. Soldiers were screaming, for medics, for their mothers, for God. Margaret's training kicked in. Assess, prioritize, stabilize. She moved through the chaos with practiced efficiency, her mind cataloging injuries in rapid succession. Shrapnel wounds, compound fractures, severe burns, internal bleeding. Then she saw the 4 soldiers trapped in the overturned Humvee. The vehicle was on its roof, partially crushed, leaking fuel. Smoke was pouring from the engine. 3 soldiers were pinned inside, conscious but trapped. The 4th, Sergeant Nathan Davis, was halfway out, his legs crushed beneath twisted metal. "Please," Davis gasped when he saw her. His face was gray with shock and pain. "Please, ma'am, my legs. I can't feel my legs." Margaret dropped beside him, her hands already assessing. Both femurs fractured, possibly severed femoral artery, massive blood loss. She could smell the gasoline, could hear the ominous creak of metal. "We're getting you out," she told him, her voice steady even though her heart was hammering. "Just hold on." That's when Private Erickson shouted, "Fire!" "The engine's on fire." Margaret's head snapped up. Orange flames were licking out from under the hood. The fuel leak was igniting. They had maybe 60 seconds before the whole vehicle exploded. Inside the Humvee, the 3 trapped soldiers started screaming. "Get them out first," Davis yelled. "Leave me. Get them out first." Margaret's mind raced through the impossible math. Davis was halfway out. If she could free his legs, she might be able to drag him clear, but that would take time. Time the 3 soldiers inside didn't have. If she tried to save Davis first, the others would burn alive. But if she left Davis to save the others, the explosion would kill him. 4 lives. 1 choice. 30 seconds. Every pair of eyes was on her. People always wonder what it feels like to make a decision like that. They imagine it's dramatic, that there's some moment of crystalline clarity where the right answer reveals itself. But the truth is messier and more brutal than that. The truth is, you just choose. You calculate the odds, you trust your training, and you make the call that might save the most people, even knowing it will destroy you. Margaret looked at Sergeant Davis. Their eyes met, and in that moment, she saw that he already knew. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Then she turned to her team and shouted, "Get those 3 out now! Move, move, move!" They pulled the trapped soldiers out in 47 seconds. 47 seconds of Davis screaming her name, begging her to come back, promising he could hold on just a little longer. 47 seconds of Margaret dragging soldiers through a window while flames climbed higher. 47 seconds that would echo in her nightmares for the rest of her life. They got the third soldier clear with 11 seconds to spare. Margaret spun back toward Davis. Already running, the Humvee exploded, the blast wave threw her 15 feet. When she staggered to her feet, ears ringing, the world had gone silent except for a high-pitched whine. Where the vehicle had been was now just twisted, burning metal. Sergeant Nathan Davis was gone, but the 3 soldiers she'd saved were alive. Margaret's phone buzzed in her lap, jolting her back to the present. Unknown number. California area code. Her hand trembled as she answered. "This is Margaret Chen. Ma'am." The voice on the other end was young, tight with emotion. "This is James Whitmore. My mom said she wrote to you." Margaret's breath caught. "Corporal Whitmore. I was there that night, ma'am. In Kandahar. September 2018. There was a long pause. I was one of the 3 soldiers you pulled out of that Humvee." The world tilted. "Captain Morrison told everyone you froze," Whitmore continued, his voice shaking now. "He said you wasted time trying to save Sergeant Davis when you should have prioritized the others. He made it sound like Davis died because you couldn't make the hard call fast enough." "I know what he said," Margaret whispered, "but that's not what happened." Whitmore's voice cracked. "You didn't freeze. You made the call instantly. You saved us first because that was the only way to save anyone. Davis told you to. He begged you to leave him and save us. I heard him, ma'am. I heard everything." Margaret closed her eyes. 7 years of silence. 7 years of carrying that weight alone. And now, "Why didn't you say anything?" she asked. "During the inquiry, why didn't you testify?" The silence on the other end stretched so long she thought he'd hung up. Finally, "Because I was ashamed." Margaret's grip tightened on the phone. "Ashamed of what?" Whitmore's breathing was ragged on the other end of the line. "You saved my life that night, ma'am. You and Corporal Jackson and Private Martinez. 3 of us walked away because you made the hardest call any leader could make. And we knew it. We all knew Davis told you to leave him. We heard him screaming at you to save us first. Then why? Because 2 days later, Captain Morrison called us into his office." Whitmore's voice dropped to barely a whisper. "He told us the official story was going to be that you hesitated, that you tried to save Davis first and wasted precious seconds, and that's why he died. He said it would be cleaner that way, less complicated. He said if we contradicted that narrative, it would raise questions about your judgment, about the whole operation, about whether proper protocols were followed." Margaret felt something cold spreading through her chest. "He told you to lie. He told us it would protect you," Whitmore said bitterly. "He said if we testified that you'd made a split-second decision to let 1 soldier die to save 3 others, it would haunt your career forever. People would call you ruthless. They'd question every decision you'd ever made. He said the kinder thing, the loyal thing, was to let the official reports say you'd simply run out time. That way, nobody was really at fault. Just bad luck. Wrong place, wrong time. And you believed him." There was no accusation in Margaret's voice, just exhaustion. "I was 21 years old, ma'am. I'd almost died. I was grateful to be alive and terrified of doing anything that might hurt the woman who saved me. His voice cracked. So I stayed quiet. We all did. And for 7 years, I told myself Morrison was right. That silence was mercy. Until my retirement ceremony. Until I watched that son of a bitch stand up there and use that silence against you. The anger in Whitmore's voice was sharp enough to cut. I saw what he did. I saw how people looked at you afterward. And I realized Morrison never gave a damn about protecting you. He was protecting himself. Margaret's mind was racing now, pieces falling into place. What do you mean? Morrison was the commanding officer that night. He's the one who approved the convoy route. He's the one who ignored intelligence reports about increased IED activity in that sector. Whitmore paused. If the investigation had dug deeper, if they'd really examined everything that happened, Morrison would have been the one answering uncomfortable questions. But by making it about your decision in the moment, he shifted all the focus away from his decisions in the days and weeks leading up to it. The words hit Margaret like a physical blow. 7 years. 7 years she'd carried the weight of Nathan Davis's death, believing she'd made an impossible but necessary choice. Never once questioning why Morrison had seemed so eager to accept the narrative that minimized her culpability. Never once wondering why he'd never asked her directly what had happened. Because he hadn't wanted to know the truth. He'd wanted a story he could control. There's more, Whitmore said quietly. After your ceremony, I started asking questions. Tracked down Jackson and Martinez. They've been carrying the same guilt I have. We all saw what Morrison did to you, and we all realized we'd been complicit in it. You were following orders from a superior officer, Margaret said automatically. That's not, with respect, ma'am, that's bullshit. Whitmore's voice was steady now, resolved. We were old enough to know right from wrong. We chose comfort over courage, but we're done being quiet. Jackson, Martinez, and we've all written sworn statements about what really happened that night. Every detail. Davis's words. Your decision. Morrison's cover-up. We're ready to submit them formally. Margaret stared through her windshield at the VA hospital, its windows dark except for the emergency room. Inside those walls were veterans carrying their own impossible weights, their own silent battles, their own unanswered questions about the choices they'd made in the worst moments of their lives. How many of them had been blamed for things that weren't their fault? How many had stayed silent because speaking up felt harder than enduring the lie? Why now? She asked. Why not during the inquiry? Why wait 7 years? Because 7 years ago I was a kid trying to survive. Whitmore's voice softened. Now I'm a father. I have a 3-year-old daughter, and last month she asked me what it means to be brave. I started to give her some bullshit answer about soldiers and heroes, and then I realized, I don't know. Because the bravest person I ever met saved my life, and I repaid her by staying silent while she got destroyed. Margaret felt tears on her cheeks. She couldn't remember when she'd started crying. I need to teach my daughter that bravery isn't just about what you do in the moment, Whitmore continued. It's about what you do after. It's about standing up even when it's hard, even when it's 7 years too late, even when you're terrified of what it might cost you. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The parking lot was empty except for Margaret's car and the distant glow of the hospital. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed. Corporal Whitmore, Margaret finally said. James, you don't owe me this. Yes, ma'am, I do. We all do. His voice was firm. The question is, what do you want us to do? Because we're ready to submit these statements tomorrow if you want us to. We're ready to request the inquiry be reopened. We're ready to tell anyone who'll listen what really happened, but only if you want us to. Margaret closed her eyes. She thought about that retirement ceremony, the whispers, the doubt in people's eyes. She thought about the last 3 weeks of isolation, of shame, of wondering if she should have fought back or if Morrison's version had become the only truth that mattered. But mostly, she thought about Sergeant Nathan Davis. She'd carried his death for 7 years, not as a burden of guilt, but as a weight of responsibility. She'd made the choice he'd begged her to make. She'd saved 3 lives at the cost of 1. And she'd accepted that calculus because that's what combat medicine demanded sometimes. Terrible math, impossible choices, and the strength to live with the aftermath. Morrison hadn't destroyed her by lying about what happened. He'd destroyed her by making her doubt that her choice had meant something, by turning Davis's sacrifice into a story about her failure. But Davis hadn't failed, and neither had she. "James," she said quietly, "I want you to submit those statements, all of them, and I want you to request the inquiry be reopened." "Yes, ma'am, but not for me." Margaret opened her eyes, and for the first time in 3 weeks she felt something solid beneath her feet. For Sergeant Davis, because he made a choice that night, too. He told me to save you and Jackson and Martinez. He begged me to leave him. And I'll be damned if I let Morrison's lies turn that into nothing. Davis deserves better. You all do. She could hear Whitmore crying now, soft and broken on the other end of the line. "Thank you, ma'am," he whispered. "Thank you for saving us. And I'm sorry. God, I'm so sorry it took me this long to save you back." "You're saving Davis," Margaret corrected gently. "That's what matters." They talked for another 20 minutes. Whitmore gave her contact information for Jackson and Martinez. They made plans to coordinate their statements, to reach out to the Navy's Inspector General, to ensure everything was documented properly. By the time they hung up, Margaret felt something she hadn't felt in 3 weeks. Purpose. She started her car and drove home. Not to hide, not to mourn, but to prepare. Because tomorrow she was going to start fighting back. The Navy's Inspector General released their findings on a Tuesday morning in March. The report was 47 pages long, but the conclusion was simple. Lieutenant Commander Margaret Chen had acted with exceptional courage and sound judgment during the September 2018 incident in Kandahar. Her decision to prioritize the 3 trapped soldiers had been consistent with established triage protocols and had saved 3 lives that would otherwise have been lost. The report further noted that the original inquiry had failed to collect critical witness testimony and had been influenced by incomplete information provided by the commanding officer. Captain Morrison was quietly forced into early retirement. No formal charges, no public reprimand, just a discreet exit and a pension. Margaret didn't care about Morrison. She cared about the other thing the report included, a full account of Sergeant Nathan Davis's final moments, including his explicit orders to prioritize the other soldiers. The report concluded with a recommendation that Davis be posthumously awarded the Navy Cross for his selfless sacrifice. The medal ceremony was held at Naval Hospital Camp Pendleton on a bright Saturday morning. Davis's widow, Rebecca, accepted the medal with their teenage son standing beside her. Margaret sat in the front row, wearing her dress whites for the first time since her retirement ceremony. When Rebecca finished her remarks, she walked directly to Margaret and pulled her into a fierce hug. "Thank you," Rebecca whispered, "for honoring what Nathan chose, for making sure people know he died a hero, not a victim of someone else's mistake." Margaret held her and said nothing, because there were no words big enough. After the ceremony, as people filtered out toward the reception, James Whitmore approached her. He wasn't alone. Jackson and Martinez were with him, all 3 in their dress uniforms. "Ma'am," Whitmore said, "there's someone we'd like you to meet." A little girl, no more than 4 years old, peeked out from behind Whitmore's leg. She had her father's eyes. "This is Emma," Whitmore said, lifting his daughter into his arms. "Emma, this is Lieutenant Commander Chen. She's the bravest person Daddy ever met." Emma studied Margaret with the serious intensity only small children can manage. Then she said, "Daddy says you're a hero?" Margaret smiled, and for the first time in 7 years the smile reached her eyes. "Your daddy and his friends are the heroes, sweetheart. I just did my job. Daddy says doing your job when it's really, really hard is what makes you brave." Margaret looked at Whitmore, at Jackson and Martinez, at all the people gathered to honor Davis's memory. She thought about impossible choices and terrible math, about silence and courage, about the weight of carrying truth alone and the relief of finally being believed. "Your daddy's right," she told Emma. "Being brave means doing the hard thing, even when you're scared, even when nobody's watching, even when it costs you everything." Emma nodded solemnly, as if she understood. Maybe someday she would. Margaret stayed at the reception for 2 hours, talking with veterans and nurses and soldiers who'd heard about the reopened inquiry. Some thanked her. Others shared their own stories of impossible choices and silent burdens. By the time she left, the sun was setting over the Pacific, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. She drove home slowly, windows down, breathing in the salt air. Tomorrow she'd start her new job at a civilian hospital. Tomorrow she'd begin the next chapter of her life, free from the weight of Morrison's lies. But tonight, she just wanted to remember Sergeant Nathan Davis. Not as a tragedy or a failure or an uncomfortable question mark, but as a soldier who'd made an impossible choice with courage and grace, and who deserved to be remembered for exactly that. Heroes weren't people who never faced terrible decisions. Heroes were people who made those decisions anyway, and lived, or died, with the consequences. Davis had been a hero, and maybe, just maybe, so had she.